Thank you. Good afternoon, ladies and well, it's good evening now, ladies and gentlemen. This is a call to order for the Finance Committee meeting. Today's Wednesday, April 9th. The time is now 6:37 p.m. Sorry for the delay. The last meeting ran a little long. Present is committee member Michael Macarone online. Myself, committee chair in person, Mr. Albert Benahed Grajales, board member and board secretary. And we got Ms. Marlene Siegel and the finance staff present. First item on the agenda is approval of minutes dated March 8th, 2023. As those minutes have not been prepared yet, we'll bypass that. Next item on the agenda is 2022-2023 budget update. Ms. Siegel, can you please take that away?
Yes, thank you, and good evening to everyone. I'm going to put on the screen my notes so that everyone can follow along with me. So in terms of 22-23, the April 30th financial condition report is in progress. Our projections
would you like that back up, please?
Larger? Okay. Yeah, yes, certainly. Is that good? Is that large enough?
A little larger, please. I'm sorry. Thank you.
Very good. Our current projections indicate that approximately 7 to 9 million would be withdrawn from the ISF reserves in order to balance the operating budget at the end of year close. As I always indicate, the amount could decline or further increase in alignment with the fiscal forecast for the operating budget. But at this time, we believe we're going to end the year in that range for withdrawal from the ISF reserves. I also want to inform you that in our Food and Nutrition Services budget, we were pleased to receive a year 2 supply chain allocation in 2 phases. The total is $506,921, and that consists of phase 1, $348,495, and phase 2, $157,796. The supply chain allocations have been provided in the pandemic years in order to assist districts in managing the higher cost of food products due to supply chain issues. And we also received a year 2 pandemic local level cost grant, which is similar to the supply chain allocations in that it's intended to alleviate the issues that arose from the pandemic. And that's a much smaller grant, $38,911, and that compares with last year, $38,033. The first allocation that I mentioned compares is higher than last year. Last year it was $371,213, and we received $506,921. Now these funds are federal funds that are restricted to usage for the food and nutrition program only. They are deposited in the separate food and nutrition budget and are used only to support the food and nutrition services in our district. Next, I want to remind everyone about the internal savings fund in regard to the reserves that we have on deposit. So for the Board of Education, prior to fiscal year 22, last year, we had 20.7 million, which had emerged as a result of the savings in the pandemic years. Then at the end of fiscal year 22, we deposited about 3.9 million. Now that was in 2 parts. That consisted of 2.6 million, which was a net operating surplus for last year. And as I have indicated throughout the entire year and toward the end of last year, fiscal year 22 was the last year of surplus. We had surpluses in those other years as a result of the district not operating with all services due to the pandemic. So at the end of fiscal year 22, we deposited 2.6 million, and we deposited from the food and nutrition budget for the payment of health insurance for food and nutrition retirees and food and nutrition workers comp expenses, 1.25 million. And just as a reminder, those funds are transferred in because we pay upfront, meaning at the start of the fiscal year for all retirees. We contribute from our operating budget into the ISF to pay for the health insurance for all retirees, including food and nutrition service retirees. And so at the end of the year, when there is a surplus, which we strive to manage during the course of the year, we deposit those funds, and those funds belong then to the Board of Education because we recoup the money that we already dedicated to the food and nutrition retirees. So the total at the end of fiscal year 22 was 24.6 million. And then there was an internal surplus that we believe occurred due to lower cost factors for the retirees and or lower expenses for workers' comp. So that was fortunate. And that was a $3 million surplus. So the grand total was 27.7, and that should increase by approximately $1 million at the end of year close for 22-23, which will occur in August 31, 2023, with the contribution from the fiscal year 23 food and nutrition budget for the retirees. Now, according to our projections, in order to close operating budget gaps, depending upon the amount of revenue and other savings that we can generate, these funds are most likely to be exhausted in fiscal year 25. And I did present an analysis in the PowerPoint that we will review later during this session for the council meeting next Tuesday. Also, in the ISF for food and nutrition services, we had deposited surplus funds from the food and nutrition budget at the end of fiscal year 22, and we have a balance of approximately 3.1 million, which is restricted to food and nutrition services only, and this restriction will be rigorously enforced. And the 3 million is net of a transfer of 1 million that we brought back into 22-23 as a credit for the purchase of nutrition center equipment, and another 1 million that we transferred in for the purchase of school equipment in the cafeterias in the schools, and net of the 1.25 million that I mentioned that was added to the ISF for the food and nutrition retirees. So the balance is about 3.1 million. And those funds will be used over a long period of time for food and nutrition services as needed for the purchase of food and nutrition equipment and or to help balance budgets in future years when it may be difficult to balance, or more difficult than it has been in the last few years. Next, in relation
Excuse me 1 second. Yeah, I'm sorry. Let the record reflect Ms. Baptiste Perez has joined the meeting. Thank you. Go ahead, continue, please. Sorry.
Thank you. And next, also in regard to 22-23, I'd like to bring everyone up to date on what was known as the Alliance Increasing Educator Diversity Grant, which is really a misnomer, and I want to explain why it's a misnomer and why there are issues with this particular item. So the State Ed Department has acknowledged an error in the initial announcement of this particular grant. It had been presented incorrectly as a new separate additional funding stream. But in actuality, the law that refers to this grant specifies a diversion of Alliance ECS resources. So there was a law passed in the last legislative session that apparently no one knew about, which states that the State Education Department is to set aside from a district's Alliance ECS allocation 10% of the increase over the 1920 allocation and redirect those funds into a grant dedicated to increasing educator diversity. So, and I'm going to show you an example of what this means to make it more concrete. But you can imagine that this involves taking funds from our Alliance allocation, which we need for operational services, and redirecting those funds for a separate function. So the State Ed Department was successful in securing a waiver of the law in the current year, because when this was announced just a few weeks ago, the Alliance district superintendents, as well as finance officers, were in an uproar because the funds for this year are already expended or committed, and there are very serious implications in terms of redirecting or diverting resources. The notification we last received on the topic indicates that the commissioner has facilitated a meeting with the Education Committee co-chairs and several of the Alliance District superintendents this week. And I do not know when it was scheduled, so it may have already happened, or perhaps it's scheduled on Thursday or Friday. I do not know. But they've scheduled a meeting to address larger concerns. So what is the outcome that we would like to see from the Bridgeport perspective? We'd like to see the legislature repeal the current law totally, or modify the law to institute a separate allocation that does not reduce in any amount the annual Alliance appropriation. And even if they had a year-over-year formula as an alternative to using 1920 as the base year, that would result in still in a diversion of critical resources that we need to fund ongoing operational needs. So let's look at an example to make this more relevant and for additional clarity. So in 1920, our Alliance allocation was $20,895,497. So if we receive an additional $3 million for 23-24, and we don't know the exact amount yet, I'll have more to share in terms of what we know at this point about the state budget, in a few moments. But if we were to receive another $3 million, then our allocation in fiscal year 24 would be $27,764,531. So the difference is $6,869,034, and 10% would be $686,903. Now, before going on, I also want to indicate that the state, when they initially announced this allocation, they imposed rigid restrictions on its use, in effect, restricting it to primarily what are called residency programs for the preparation of new of new teachers, which we have used and are continuing to use. But they are very expensive programs, and are not the only types of services that could be that we would want to use in order to increase educator diversity. So they have very, very tight restrictions on how the funds can be used. If we were to receive another $3 million in fiscal year 25, then our Alliance allocation would be $30,764,531. And then under the current law, 10% diverted would be $986,903. So now it's almost $1 million at a time when we need additional funding for operational resources, as well as to continue to compensate for the learning losses of the pandemic years. And so the diverted amount is rising in each subsequent year and would no longer be available to fund teacher positions and other critical operational services that we fund in Alliance ECS. Alliance ECS, as I have presented, and in the time I've been here in Bridgeport, is the equivalent of operating resources. And so our operating budget consists of the city and state share plus the Alliance ECS grant. Now, we certainly would want the additional Alliance allocation to be much higher than $3 million. $3 million is clearly not adequate. And if the current law stands and the allocation increases further, then the amount diverted would also increase concurrently. So in 23-24, the best case scenario in the event the law stands would be that we do have resources in ARP ESSER that are currently targeted to university partnerships to increase teacher recruitment and diversity. And those resources could then be redeployed with appropriate budget and program modification to the state, of course, for approval and in accordance with the ESSER guidelines to offset the revenue loss. We would basically fund other types of services that are allowable under the guidelines, such as contracted special ed services as one example, in order to offset the loss of revenue. However, starting in 24-25, which is after the expiration of the ESSER grants, we would have an increased shortfall in the operating budget for basic operational functions. So this issue presents an additional challenge for us. Hopefully, and I'll just scroll back to where I indicated the desired outcome from our perspective. Hopefully, the legislature will repeal the current law or modify it to institute an allocation that does not reduce the Alliance appropriation. Right. And finally, in regard to 22-23, I just want to remind everyone about the factors that are impacting the 22-23 budget. As I indicated previously and throughout this year, in the current year, we are anticipating, in effect, a deficit, a shortfall condition, which we are closing by withdrawing funds from the savings on deposit. And the main factor is that we're now operating with full services. But the other factors that are specific to this year are that the Alliance ECS increase in the current year was only $15,434 compared to $1.5 to $2 million in prior years. So we opened at a reduced resource level. Also, transportation was impacted by the pandemic, and so costs have now increased in year one of the new 5-year agreement with We Transport, our transportation company, and that's an additional 6.72%. In special ed, while we're very pleased that out-of-district placements have declined, that is a highly positive development, our share of an out-of-district placement has increased because our NCEP is up. Why? Because of the infusion of the ESSER funds. And the cap increased this year to 23.75%, up from 18.02%. So our share of an out-of-district placement has risen, and the formula is 4.5 times the NCEP plus the cap times the balance. And we do have increased costs in other special ed sectors, such as one-to-one paras and occupational therapy and speech. Also, English language learners, the number has continued to rise with a concomitant increase in services. Our average teacher salary has risen beyond turnover savings due to the teacher shortage. Why? Because we are hiring more experienced teachers. There are very few teachers coming to us who are recent graduates starting their first year of teaching in Bridgeport. There has been a much higher percentage over the last year of experienced teachers, ranging anywhere from 7 years to 12 years, or even 14 or 15 years of experience or more, who are being hired to fill vacancies. So the average teacher's salary is higher than it would have been in prior years, and has exceeded, as I indicated, turnover savings. And finally, on a positive note, we are continuing to utilize our ESSER funds in strict accordance with the ESSER guidelines for services that arose from the pandemic, and that are allowable under the guidelines, including technology renewal, curriculum renewal, and the supplemental English language learner and SPED services. So by that I mean services that arose as a result of the pandemic. So in the ESSER grants, I'm currently funding 12 special ed teachers, 8 resource teachers and 4 teachers in ASD kindergarten classes that were opened last year for the first time. So that's 12, and there are also 6 ESL teachers in the ESSER grant. So we have 18 teachers, and looking ahead to 24-25, if the needs in those areas do not subside, we will have to bring back those 18 teachers into district operating resources and/or grants that allow for those services to be funded, subject to availability of funding. Now, I included these charts because just like to show you what's happening. In the English language learner category, we started in October of this year at 26.28%, and we're now up in April to 27.29%. And the enrollment is 5,278. For special ed, we started at 18.86%, and we're now up to 19.62%. And the growth has been 185 students. Flipping back to the L chart, we're up 250 students in this year alone. And I'm not seeing any, let's see, so 30 to 40 to 34 to 39. We're not seeing any specific trend. I mean, the trend is up, but I'm not seeing a declining trend yet. All right, so I've concluded the 22-23 report. I'll stop here before moving on to 23-24. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm gonna go first this time. So, got a lot to unpack with this educator diversity fund. These are only alliance districts being, only alliance funds being used. There's no, are you aware of any obligations put on districts that aren't alliance districts, such as Greenwich, Westport, and all these other districts who also have recruitment problems with teachers of color?
To the best of our knowledge, this applies only to the alliance districts, and in fact, one of the alliance district superintendents highlighted for the state ed department that fact that this appeared to penalize the alliance districts, which are primarily districts that are economically disadvantaged and service a diverse group of students and have diverse groups of educators. Obviously, we want to increase the diversity. And he indicated that the grant was penalizing those districts.
Right.
That all students should have the opportunity to be taught by diverse educators.
So in essence, I'm gonna go a bit on my soapbox here. The alliance districts, majority of which are Black and brown, are being penalized to the extent of 10% of their grants that they're being given for being underserved districts in order to increase the diversity pool of underrepresented people in the underrepresented places. And we're the only ones subjected to this unfunded mandate, while all the other districts, the other 130 districts, which are probably 85% to 90% Caucasian and much more well off because they're not in an alliance district, have to expend no funds to recruit minority staff. And this is definitely disgusts me on several levels. One level is, why we hear about these things by surprise, not reflecting on our staff, not reflecting on everything. We can't follow every single law, which is one of the reasons why I proposed a lobbyist, because we need people looking out for us, because apparently these things were voted on and passed by our legislators and it never came to us. Why is it something that's going to cost us $600,000 bounced off us? Why isn't anybody coming to us and saying, hey, this bill right here, it's going to cost you $600,000. What do you think about it? Should we support this or not? I don't even know how legislators voted on something.
We certainly were not aware of it, and in fact, our grants office, and Nadira is on the call, can speak to this if necessary, but our grants office noticed that this was several weeks ago, that the state had put into the EGMS, which is the funding system, a new allocation. And it was called the Alliance Increasing Diversity Grant. And she informed me, and we informed the superintendent, and we thought it was a new grant. And that is what how the state presented it, a new grant. And at no time when it was first placed in the system was anyone notified that it was to be a diversion of 10% from the existing grant. So the first announcement came several weeks ago, meaning in the spring term. So it leads me to believe that even the officials in the state ed department perhaps didn't have knowledge of this law until the early spring.
Wow. there's, I'm gonna pass off my questions before I say something I regret. Ms. Baptiste Perez?
Fortunately, I came in the middle of this presentation and it was not sent to us in our portal packet. So I didn't get to preview what was presented in advance. I guess the diversion of money in a district of our status that's dire for funds is not a good thing, and I completely understand that. I think, and this is a generalization just from an overview of what was presented, so I could be wrong, but teachers in a district that reflect the students in general is a great idea. It is a great idea. It's necessary. I think it opens the pathway to it, but taking it out of our Alliance Fund is probably not the best thing for it. And it doesn't seem like the presentation statewide or to the other Alliance districts seems to be adequate with notice from a perspective of how that's going to impact, in particular, Bridgeport. And so whatever steps we have to do, I think will be necessary. But I'm sorry, I just didn't receive this in my packet, so I don't have more detailed comments.
Mr. Macaron?
I'm okay with what's been said so far. I don't have any main comments that I want to make. Okay.
Mr. Traber?
I mean, I would hope that it is the desire of all of the legislators in the state of Connecticut that the teaching workforce in any given community reflects the students that live in those communities. So I don't know why they believe that we should be the only ones that fund that. It should be something that they funded, particularly since we've been underfunded. So I think you have a right to get on that soapbox. I agree with Ms. Baptiste Perez about the importance of the diversification of the teaching workforce. But I think that the state should bear the burden. It's my understanding that somebody has recently discovered a new one of these hidden bombs in the pending legislation that would require us to pay more money in a few years, that in case something bad happens. So I think that it's really important that we comb this out and figure out, and I look forward to what Ms. Perrin finds out when she meets with them.
Mr. Benahan? Benahan, if you're speaking, you're on mute. I don't think we got Mr. Benahan at the moment. Is there any other questions from anybody else? Hearing none, I guess you can continue, Ms. Siegel.
Thank you. Would you want to introduce, for the record, the next topic?
Oh, yes, I'm sorry. Thank you. Yes, next up on the agenda is 23-24 budget status.
Thank you. So as the first topic in this category, I wanted to bring to your attention that the MERS rate, which it pertains to the employer share for non-certified full-time employees for retirement, for the retirement fund. So that is called MERS, the municipal fund. And the contribution rate, which is the percentage that we have to contribute for every non-certified full-time employee, is increasing in 23-24 from 21.58% to 25.36%. So that's a substantial increase. It's almost 4 percentage points. It is higher than the original anticipated increase of 1 to 2%. However, in terms of the impact on our budget projection, I did include an increase for MERS of approximately $1 million, and that should be adequate in the operating budget to cover the growth. In the grant accounts, the combined additional expense is projected at around 400,000, with the predominant amount in Title I and IDEA. Now, we would, which by the way, will be absorbed with the funds that we roll over in those grants. And that's one of the reasons that we strive to roll funds whenever possible in grants that allow for rollover within the allowable amount. One of the reasons is to be able to pay for the escalated costs in those grants and not impose an additional need on the main operating budget. Now, we would expect future increases, if any, to be minimal. However, future rates could potentially be higher, dependent upon the state of the economy and investment results. Now, why do I think future increases would be minimal? Well, originally we were told that the rate would rise to about 25%. However, there aren't any guarantees. To date, we do not have an updated indication of potential rates beyond 23-24, so we have to be prepared for potential further increase in the following year. Now, in regard to health insurance, we anticipated a 6% increase. We did receive some information today on the partnership rates effective July 1 of 23, and my team is in the process of analyzing those rates, and I hope to have the tables ready that I need for determining the employer share of the premium by the end of this week or early next week. So at that point, we'll be able to assess, based on the employer share, the actual growth factor. So I just wanted you to be aware that we're in the process of assessing those rates. We're still working in our budget request with approximately a 6% increase. And hopefully it will be in that range and not significantly higher. Now, let's move on to the state budget and the city budget. So I'm going to share what I know at this point, and what I know is based upon the information I've read on the web, which anyone can access and read as well. So for the state budget, the House Bill HB 5003 did not pass, meaning it did not come through the legislative committees. And so full funding of the ECS formula, we're presuming until we receive any further information, would occur by 2028, which was the year under the original plan, and not 25. So House Bill 5003 was being supported by the Connecticut School State Finance Project, because it would have allocated the full funding over the course of 2 years rather than 5 years. So that did not pass. That was a disappointment. Now, I did read in a newsletter from an organization that, and I put this in quotes, I just read this morning, that the Appropriations Committee slightly expedited the scheduled phase-in of the grant, of the ECS grant, from 45.4 million to 48 million. Now, that is not highly significant, and from 90.7 in the second year to 96. So it's certainly better in the second year. But that increase would be for the entire state. It'd be distributed across the entire state proportionately. And the newsletter went on to say that Representative Jeff Curry thanked the legislature for the commitment during a year in which tough choices were made, although he observed that the allocation is only a fraction of the cost needed to fully fund a fair, student-centered ECS grant. So that is exactly our belief that funding is not significant for a fair student-centered allocation, particularly in Bridgeport. Now, according to the original analysis at the website of the Connecticut School State Finance Project, we were targeted to receive at least another $3 million per year going up to fiscal year 28. I've included in my notes on the screen that that is, it's welcome, but it's insufficient, and it certainly appears to be inequitable in relation to the NCEP, net current expenditures per pupil of our peer districts. I don't have the information on the other districts. It doesn't appear to be available at this point at the website. I think they they're in the process of completing an updated budget analysis town by town based on the proposed budget that was released by the Appropriations Committee yesterday. So that analysis should be available according to their newsletter by the end of this week. So when I went to their website, I don't see any charts showing the comparison with the other districts without the House Bill 5003. So we will wait until the end of this week until they complete their analysis, and then we will know the amount that is in the current proposal that emerged from the Appropriations Committee, and be able to compare that with other districts. So that's the status on the state. Now moving on to the city budget. So the mayor's budget includes a $2 million increase to the city share. And in the last 2 years, the city also increased the city share by $2 million in each year. And I just want to acknowledge that that's a positive outcome, because that's far better than the prior years. And some of those years had zero increase or $1 million increase. So it's certainly positive that hopefully $2 million is now a base addition. However, it's inadequate. It's a 0.76% increase in the total operating budget. And I think you all recall that over the last 8 years, the average growth in revenue has been 1.12%. 1.12%.
Could you pause for a moment, please?
Now 7:20.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear the question.
Productive evening here.
Just pause for a moment to do an announcement.
Teaching staff.
Should I continue?
Yes.
Oh, thank you. All right. So this percentage growth is inadequate to keep pace with escalated costs. And on April 25th, we'll meet with the City Council Budget and Appropriations Committee. And I'm going to share in the next segment the PowerPoint that the superintendent and I will present.
Okay, let's pause for a second for some questions.
Yeah, I would just like, Mr. Sakalovic, if I may, I just put into the notes the city budget timeline, as well as some information on the state budget process that I thought would be helpful. So I'd just like to review that in one to 2 minutes, and then I will stop.
Okay,
All right, thank you. So this is the city budget timeline, and we are over here basically because the mayor submitted the proposed budget to the city council. The meetings and public hearings, the meetings with the Budget and Appropriations Committee, the BAC, and public hearings will be held next week. And by May 9th, the city council submits the budget to the mayor. May 23rd is the last day for the mayor to veto the city council's adopted general fund budget. May 30th is the last day for the city council to vote on the mayor's veto, if a veto occurs. And on June 6th, the city council sets the mill rate, right? So the Budget and Appropriations Committee is working within a May 9th end date for submission of the general fund budget. So we're hoping that they will increase the allocation for the Board of Education. I also wanted to mention that according to the news reports, the mayor's budget includes $1 million for the new High School Promise program, which is a program intended for college scholarships. And certainly that is a worthy cause, that everyone would support. However, I also read that the allocation was originally to be $500,000. So there may be some leeway for the council to perhaps, recommend a reallocation of resources in order to increase the Board of Education's operating budget. And I also extracted from an email from one of the state representatives, Andre Baker. He included this graphic about understanding the state budget process. So I thought this would be helpful. So we're in an odd numbered year, 2023. And in odd number years, the General Assembly passes a budget for the next 2 fiscal years. So in April, after months of public hearings and committee meetings, the legislature proposes their own version of the state budget. So that has happened now. That happened yesterday. And then through the rest of April and then May and June, the legislators and the governor's office will negotiate a budget compromise. The General Assembly will then vote on the negotiated budget, and the governor will sign or veto the budget. Now, usually we will see a final budget emerge within the first week of May. Sometimes they pass an extension. I would say no later than June 1, we would know the state budget, and most likely much sooner. So sometime between May 1st and June 1st, we will know the final state budget. Thank you.
okay, I'm gonna go first yet again. Couple of things I would like to address that seems to be counterintuitive that you have said. 5003 not passing is not necessarily a terrible thing. We were slated to get $14 million. Only $10 million was attributed to the ECS. We're getting the ECS anyway over the past 3 years, so that leaves $4 million. May I ask how much our magnet school tuition is every year?
Well, magnet tuition has many connotations. We're charging suburban districts $3,000 per student to attend our interdistrict magnet schools.
And how many seats do we have available? We're charging tuition.
I don't have that data, but there may be seats.
Yeah, I do. We got about 2,000 total seats. About 500 are available for charging tuition. That's approximately $1.5 million in potential tuition charges we could get from out-of-state districts. So over 3 years, that's $4.5 million. By not having HB 5003, at the end of the 3 years, if we charge full tuition, will be $500,000 ahead of the game. And under 5003, magnet tuition would have went away. But now
Yes,
we can charge magnet tuition in perpetuity.
yeah, and I also want to add, since you mentioned magnet schools, I have stated in this forum several times that we need to make certain that we no longer lose money on the Fairchild Wheeler campus. The deficit in the state magnet grant for those 3 high schools this year is $1.7 million that we have to cover in our operating budget. That deficit is composed of several parts, meaning, barring any other changes, it goes up due to escalated costs, but also they continue to lose students this year. So in those areas under which we have a degree of control, we have to make certain that we stem the tide of revenue loss.
Absolutely. And that 14 million was net of all those calculations, but all those other things going away, except for we still could charge magnet tuition. Hopefully we could turn the boat around, but have 5003 pass, we would lose the ability to charge that tuition overall. And the next thing I'd like to address for my part is the Bridgeport Promise. It's a lofty goal for a city that funds K through 12 education so that students could make it to college in the first place. Now, if you recall, the first number you mentioned was $500,000, which was the initial number. That number is quite familiar to a lot of us, is because, as you know, during budget negotiations between the city council and the mayor of Bridgeport last year, there was an additional $500,000 that was slated for Bridgeport Public School students. It was slated to go to our budget, but due to a breakdown in communications and a power struggle between the mayor and the city of Bridgeport, the promised $500,000 never made it to our students, never made it to our budget. So instead of adding $500,000 to our MBR this year, the mayor instead chooses to fund Bridgeport Promise. I refer to it as Bridgeport's broken promise because that $500,000 should have went to our students. And now adding another $500,000 to college, while our students are struggling to even be able to make it to college due to a lack of funding, chronic underfunding from Mayor Ganim in his 8 years of office to continue until now, our kids are starving, our kids are in trouble. Now we got a election year gimmick of $1 million for Bridgeport Promise. No, that money should be redirected to Bridgeport Public Schools because our kids need to be able to make it to college. Anyway, now I'm going to stop again because I'm getting overly heated. And Ms. Baptiste-Perez. Yeah.
My opinion, I think it's unfortunate that HB 5003 didn't pass. In terms of the sentiments towards Bridgeport Promise, I agree with Mr. Sokolovic. Given the fact that in my short tenure on the board, to see that we're underfunded and we're still on a fiscal cliff where even with the funds from HB 5003, that's not coming. We're going to be faced with big decisions that will impact all students and families in the city. And if we can't fully fund our schools and get the support from the city or the state, and we're not preparing our students fairly, and let me retract that. Our teachers and our staff, I know they're doing their best. We do offer great programs, but we are not being adequately funded from this city. And so it is an election ploy to get votes. I can't try to think of a way to make it nice, but We needed more than $500,000 last year, and we didn't get it, even though roles were eliminated from the mayor's office. And we need significantly more money this year, and we're not going to get it. So I don't, it's unfair to our students, it's unfair to our staff, it's unfair to this city to even market it as a promise towards education without us fully funding it, and the dire ramifications that's going to happen once the ARPS funds are gone. So it's really unfortunate for the city of Bridgeport, and I wish that parents, constituents would actually come out and voice that particular concern, because it will impact the entire community with the fiscal cliff that's coming.
Mr. Macaron?
Hello. I agree with both Ms. Baptiste Perez and Mr. Sokolovic's remarks about the city and how this is really a political ploy. And I just hope something can happen, which could turn this around for the city. That's it.
Mr. Bonan?
I'm agree with you, as you said, Mr. Chair and Ms. Baptiste. You know, it's something that we are. You both of you say something, everything clear, but it's sad that we have to go through this every year, and when they're gonna take care, when they're gonna care about our students. That's my question. But no question, no comment, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Traber.
Yeah, I just want to, I agree with most of what's been said, so I won't repeat. But from my point of view, it's not 8 years, it's 20 years that Mayor Ganem has underfunded our schools. And our children have not been a priority. The education of our children has not been a priority. And even if we got the 500,000 last year and the $1 million this year, we still wouldn't come anywhere near the money we need to properly run this school system, let alone to provide our children with the opportunities that the children down the Gold Coast get in their school districts. And that's what's supposed to be happening. In the legislature, the fight over 503 versus the governor's budget ignores the reality that reallocation of state monies from the wealthier suburbs to the less wealthy or the poor urban areas is part of what should be going on in a good government. So we will talk to our council people if they were, but the expectation that we're going to get them to fund like Waterbury, and Mr. Sokolovic has pointed out many times how much more money Waterbury provides out of their municipal budget versus Bridgeport. If we got that kind of money, we'd still have trouble, but the state is really where we're getting let down. I don't agree with 503. I think it was a misguided bill, but what it does show is that a large percentage of legislators thought there was a big cache of money that could be reallocated given the state's budget surplus towards the poor, underfunded urban districts. So I would hope, I would point out that Representative Baker is my representative. He, in that outline, Ms. Siegel, it's June 8th. June 8th is the deadline, June 8th at midnight. And they will be making sausage way past May 30th. We have moved the municipal budget cycle back more than it was in past years, as you know, Ms. Siegel. But it's still, we won't know for certain. We'll have a better idea by the end of May. We won't know for certain. But this is closer than it's ever been in terms of coinciding the creation of the municipal and the state budget. And we should keep pressuring the state to come up with more money right through. we're going to work next week on the city council. We'll work in the ensuing weeks on the city council and hope that they will come up with more money, especially since it's an election year. But we also have to keep putting pressure on our state delegation to put pressure up in Hartford to get us more money, because the state has that kind of surplus. And I know of several different ways they could reallocate that money, despite what the Appropriations Committee did yesterday. So we're not done. The fights are all over the place still.
Anybody else? Okay, Ms. Siegel, you may continue, please.
Yes, thank you. I did want to also provide a brief update on the ESSER grants. And so the first chart is basically the same information I presented previously. I just wanted to reemphasize that ESSER 2 will end on September 30th of 23. We entered this year last July 1st with 21,030,684 remaining, and we will expend those funds fully by September 30th of 23. So we are on track to expend fully. For ARP ESSER, that grant will end on September 30th, 24. We entered this year with 80,145,351 remaining, and we're going to be expending, I believe, it's around 40 million this year, maybe even higher, and then expend the balance next year. Now, I also wanted to indicate that in ESSER 2, we have reserved funds for the library renewal project. And so we are awaiting the board's approval on Monday, April 24th of that project. I know there was a question raised at the last meeting of how it's funded. So I just wanted to take this opportunity to present the funding information so you hear it directly from me. And it is 100% grant funded, primarily in ESSER 2. And so we have reserved those funds. We need to expend those funds. We have to process those orders now in the current year to ensure full usage and receive the discounted pricing. There were two items that the CAO, Melissa Jenkins, presented: the Capstone Pebble Go agreement and the Brain Pop agreement. The Capstone agreement, almost 700,000, that is in ESSER 2. And Brain Pop, around 500,000, that is split across 3 grants, primarily ESSER 2, almost 380,000, and the balance in ARP ESSER, and a small portion in Title IV. And once again, we're on track to expend all of the funds by the end of each grant period in accordance with the plans. And once we have the board approval on Monday, we'll be able to encumber the approximately over $1 million, probably 1.2 million for the library project, primarily in ESSER 2. All right, thank you. And are we ready to move on to item 3 on the agenda?
Yes, ma'am.
All right.
One moment, please. I'm sorry, Mr. Chair.
Yeah, I know this document that you have on screen now, Ms. Siegel, and the timeline on the municipal budget and the overview that you showed us at the beginning are not in our packets. Are they available?
Well, they can be. These are my notes. I work on my notes up until 5 o'clock on the day of the meeting. So
okay.
Because I want you to have the most current information.
Okay.
So can you send that to us, please?
I will send it to the superintendent's office. Yes.
Thank you.
Oh, you can continue.
All right. Thank you. I just need a moment now to bring up the next item. So this is the next topic is the presentation to the council, the city council Budget and Appropriations Committee on Tuesday, April 25th. And so I prepared for the superintendent this presentation, and you will recognize most of the slides from the operating budget request. And then there are several new slides. And the sequence of slides and the division into sections is specific to the council presentation. So as we review it this evening, in the interest of everyone's time, my goal would be to move through those slides with which you are familiar rather quickly. If I'm going too fast, please feel free to stop me. And where we have new slides, I'll spend more time on those. And basically what I want to do this evening is just highlight the key points that superintendent and I think should be highlighted. I'm sure that you will have commentary. So the presentation would be divided into 5 parts: the key facts, the 22-23 budget status, the 23-24 operating budget requests for the city share, the ESSER 2 ARP ESSER funding cycle, and the fiscal cliff 24-25. So the key facts would pertain to enrollment, with particular attention to special ed and English language learners, the NCEP, the peer district comparison, special ed, and transportation. So for district enrollment, you've seen this chart. The important points here are that, yes, we did lose students over the 5-year period indicated. However, we have not been able to close any buildings, and the loss of students does not automatically translate into an ability to reduce classes. You could lose 100 students, and that might mean 10 students in each of 10 schools across multiple grades. And the loss of 1 or 2 students in a classroom does not mean that you can reduce a class with the associated staff. Also, the special ed and the L student population has grown significantly. And the percentages are indicated. Now, I've included another slide on special ed and English language learners because this is critical. And as an urban district, we are experiencing the growth to at a higher level than other districts, but it's actually a statewide occurrence. That the L population has grown. So other districts are also experiencing the need. So our special needs populations are increasing. They require more intensive services with lower student staff ratios and a higher cost factor. And the grants that we receive for special ed and English language learners have not kept pace with the growth in service needs. So you heard me say earlier that we're utilizing ESSER funding for 6 ESL teachers. So the increase in the Title III and state bilingual grants this year was helpful, but it wasn't adequate to meet all of the needs. And you can see here's the comparison for April of 23 to October of 21. And special ed is up to 19.62 over 18.23, and English language learners 27.29 compared to 23.15. And then we have the same charts that I showed you earlier. Moving on, the NCEP, we have the January 22 chart and the January 23 to indicate that while our ranking has increased and our NCEP has increased, this is temporary. It's due to the infusion of the ESSER funding. And once the ESSER funding evaporates, our ranking is going to fall again. So that's important for everyone to understand. And in terms of the peer district comparison, you can see the city shares indicated, and Waterbury's at 39.4. Hartford is at 31%. Right. And in terms of the Alliance grant, we received $15,434, while Hartford had 1.3 million. And even Stanford had 1.2. Waterbury 6.8. So no one has provided a satisfactory explanation. Special ed, we have been spending 30% of the operating budget and 26% of the grand total budget on special ed, almost $96 million last year in 21-22. Right. And out of district, net of the reimbursement grant from the state was almost 21 million. In district, about 75 million. Transportation. So last year, the transportation costs started to rise as we returned to full service. This year, it's rising again, not only because we have full services, but also as a result of the new contract. And right now, we're projecting that we're going to expend about $24 million. And that's net of the reimbursement we get from the state for the transportation of the out-of-district suburban students into the our district to attend the interdistrict magnet schools. We also have funding in Title I set aside for the transportation of homeless students. So the actual expenditure is closer to about 25 million, but the net impact is about 24 million. And then we move on to part 2, which is the 22-23 budget status. Okay, but the key points that we would like the council members to understand before we move on to part 2 is that our enrollment did decline over a period of time. Now it's starting to rise again, but even as it was falling, we had to maintain schools and class structure, and we have rising needs in the areas of special ed and English language learners, and rising costs for transportation and special education, as well as English language learners. So moving on to the budget status, we want to discuss briefly the overall status of the operating budget, in enrollment in terms of trends and implications, the SPED-L services in terms of the grants, and the state city share and the average percentage growth. So this is the standard pie chart showing the operating budget with the traditional components of the operating budget on top, the city share and state ECS, including Alliance. And then we supplement that with major grants in the categories listed. So Title I, Title II, Title III, IDEA, state grants, priority, bilingual, and magnet. And those total around 34 million. Keep in mind that there are essential services in these federal and state grants that are listed. The magnet grants are funding teachers and the principals at the interdistrict magnet schools. The bilingual grants are funding bilingual teachers. The state priority grant is funding the restorative practice specialists who are in the elementary schools. It's funding, as another example, the 3 JROTC instructors who are 50% funded from the U.S. Navy at the BMA high school. it funds a portion of our kindergarten teachers, and numerous other services that we regard as essential. Now, the city share is 27.9%, the state share 72.1%, and the revenue growth factor in the current year, 22-23, 0.78%, not even 1% growth in revenue. All right. This is the chart that you've seen in the past that shows, once again, the average revenue growth just in the core operating budget over the last 8 years, 1.12%. That is insufficient to keep pace with escalating costs. And I always indicate that that's after we take into account our efforts at cost control and management. So we take every possible step to control and reduce costs wherever possible. But there isn't any district in this country that can manage successfully with a growth factor of 1.12%. Right, and then we move on to part 3, which is the operating budget request. And in the request, we're indicating that we actually need, just in operating services alone, 26.5%. And at this point, we're projecting that we're going to receive from the state a minimum of $3 million. As indicated earlier, we hope it will be higher. And from the city, we requested 12.4. Okay. Now, we're assuming at this time, because we don't have any other information, that these major grants will stay relatively stable or increase at a rate that will, at a minimum, allow for coverage of the escalated costs. But as I always indicate, a grant can also decline. And there have been declines in the priority grant over the last 8 years. I mentioned there were increases in the bilingual grants and Title state bilingual and Title III from the federal government, but not enough to absorb all of the additional costs. But it's important to understand that a grant can also decline. Now, why do we need $26.5 million? This again is a chart that you have seen, and the amounts indicated for collective bargaining, for health insurance, for MRF, for the transportation increase for next year, and utilities. These items highlighted in the teal color amount to 12.4 million, and that is why we're requesting 12.4 from the city. Now, the balance of the need consists of 1.8 for projected growth that we think is likely to happen in the areas of special ed and English language learners. And most importantly, everyone should understand that $9 million of the 26.5 pertains to funds that we're projecting may have to be withdrawn from the ISF savings to balance in the current year. I want to emphasize, as I stated at the start of this meeting, that the actual number in the end of year close may be lower. I also said it could be higher, although at this point I'm hopeful that it will not be higher. So it may be 7 million. Maybe it'll be 6.5 million. And if it is 7 million, that would mean there's another 2 million retained in the reserves that can help to close a gap, the gap that will occur in the next year. And then when we build the budget, we always build it to include the assumption that all positions will be filled. And that is certainly our goal, and we strive to fulfill that goal. However, the reality is there is likely to be a number of positions that are not filled. They'll be covered by substitutes at lower cost, and that will generate savings. But when we build the initial budget, I have to assume that they all will be filled. And if they were, I would need, in effect, the savings that were achieved in the prior year in order to close the gap. So that's $4 million. So out of the 26.5, 13 million, approximately half, is to allow for filling of positions that in prior year were not filled and generated savings, and to compensate for the funds withdrawn from the reserves on deposit, which don't automatically replenish. Okay. And then the balance is basically collective bargaining growth and an additional cost factor for special ed and English language learners. Also for turnover savings, we have a lower number than in prior years. And that's because, as I mentioned earlier, the average teacher salary has risen beyond turnover savings. So we may or may not achieve the million. It may turn out to be 500,000 or 750,000, or perhaps it will be $1 million. But it's definitely lower because of the hiring of more experienced teachers. This is the breakdown for the 5.3 million. And how do we close the gap? Well, the city currently has put 2 million in the budget, right? And the state has, we think we're going to receive at least 3 million from the state. So that's 5 million. Then we would have to withdraw $15 million from the ISF, from the reserve. So if we have to use 9 million this year and 15 million for next year, that's 24 million from a balance of around 28. Now the 28 will go up by another million with the addition of the funds from the food and nutrition budget for their retirees, as I indicated earlier. But for the moment, to keep this very simple, if we have 28 and we withdraw 9 plus 15, there's basically 4 million remaining before we add any additional funds. Okay, so that's 15 million. And to reemphasize, if we only have to withdraw 7 million to close this year, or 6 million, then obviously we would have additional funds on reserve, and that would be beneficial. And then I'm looking at utilizing an additional 2 million, close to 2 million in ARPS or in the final year to reduce the pressure on the operating budget, but I have to do that in strict compliance with the grant guidelines. As I mentioned earlier, we can't fund the principal of a school in the ESSER grant. We cannot fund grade 2 teachers in the ESSER grant. So we can't fund core operating expenses that we would have under any conditions in this grant. But we can fund various types of services that, according to the guidelines, are defined as supplemental, such as curriculum renewal or technology renewal. And then we would continue in Title I, where we've been holding approximately $1 million for non-recurring expenses and redeploy those funds. And then there may be additional vacancies, not additional, but there may be vacancies that occur or continue to occur in 23-24, and those vacancies will generate savings. And so on the screen, you can see the closing the gap plan totaling $26.5 million. All right, and also we incorporate all of the usual strategies. So it's important to emphasize to everyone that we are continually focused on cost control and management. And so, you know, if we should have an assistant principal vacancy, for example, where a 12-month AP retires, what we have been doing in the past is to convert it to a 10-month AP, and we generate some savings. It's a small amount in relation to the amount that we need, but nevertheless generates some savings. So it's just here as an example of the steps that we take. And we utilize our grants in lieu of operating funds for curriculum and technology renewal. And that's why I continue to emphasize those areas, because they are allowable under the grant guidelines. And finally, we have rigorous controls in place for position control, procurement control, and internal control. All right, now they may be wondering, well, what do you have in your district office? You know, they may be thinking maybe you should start reducing in your district. Well, we are streamlined. We have only 110 full-time employees, and we're providing all of the necessary services for students in a school district. So this slide was included in the budget request. It's included in the council presentation to highlight that we're not providing any frills. We're providing the essential and mandated services to support the educational program. Now, also in the operating budget, you can see from the percentages that I believe it's 70, so close to 80% is on direct instruction and instructional support. The administrative support services are 23.5%. And what does that mean? Well, it pertains to all the services listed below, you know, business, facilities, HR, payroll, pupil services, security, transportation, technology, and student data management. And what are the major contributors? Facilities and transportation. So before we can educate children, we have to make sure we can transport them to the school. We also have to make sure the school is properly structured and maintained and safe. And we have to have security. We also have to have an operational infrastructure with administration and clerical staff. And then we can start the process of actual instruction. And so there are some critical factors affecting the budget in 23-24, because at this point, you know, some council members may still be thinking or wondering, well, gee, that number seems high. Well, we explained why the number was high. Half of that number is escalated costs, and half is compensating for the funds we never received for operating expenses. And but there are some key factors that I thought should be emphasized and re-emphasized. Number one, the student enrollment. While student enrollment declined in between fiscal year 16 and 22, it has started to rise again. However, we have maintained by necessity the 38 school sites and the class structure, as the reduction in enrollment has not warranted class or budget reductions. The special ed and ELL populations continue to grow while overall enrollment declined. And in the current year, enrollment is increasing and those populations are growing, and they're continuing to grow. They have not stabilized yet. And there's a concurrent rise in service needs and expense. Teacher salaries have risen, not only in alignment with the collective bargaining agreement, but also to remain competitive with other districts, all confronting the challenges of a severe teacher shortage. And that pertains to hiring more experienced teachers, because those are the teachers who are applying for the jobs, as well as taking into account every aspect of their experience in order to put them on an appropriate salary step in the table. The the escalated costs. The annual expense of the escalated costs has never been fully funded by the annual increase in the state city share in the operating budget. And finally, critical point, revenue growth. Average revenue growth of 1.2% a year over the last 8 years is clearly insufficient to keep pace with escalated costs after taking into account our ongoing focused efforts at cost control and management. All right, moving on to part 4. We want to acknowledge that we did receive ESSER grants amounting to $144.9 million. Yes, we've been fortunate to have those funds in order to help compensate for learning loss during the pandemic. But this was a one-time infusion of resources. It will be ending, evaporating. Final date is September 30th of 24. All funds will be encumbered by that date. And all the services listed will no longer be funded. And some of those services will have to be funded in the operating budget and will increase the operating need, as I indicated previously, unless the need has declined, specifically in special ed and English language learning. And it's important to also understand that we have been leveraging our grant resources, that we're focused on optimizing our resources to achieve a longer term impact. What does that mean? Well, it means that with ESSER funds, as an example, we purchased some curriculum products over a multi-year cycle, which was allowable. So for example, Discovery Science will operate from the current year through 2030 for the various grade levels in tiers. And that was close to $2.7 million. So we've been leveraging our funds in curriculum development and in technology renewal in that ESSER grant so that we get a longer term impact. However, we cannot retain any of the funds for offsetting basic operating costs in 24-25. So while we've been building a sustainable foundation, at least for a number of years, going forward in curriculum and in technology as examples, we will now have to confront the operating needs without any resources to help offset. Okay. So now we're going to move on to the last part, which is part 5, and that is the service and the fiscal cliff. And so what does that mean? Well, first of all, there's a service cliff coming, and that means the ESSER grants are ending. And we're going to lose all of those wonderful services. Or said another way, we will no longer have the funding for those services. And unless there are supplemental grants, which we are applying for every possible grant that could help to maintain one or more services, either wholly or partially, but there aren't any guarantees. Also, there's an impending fiscal cliff due to insufficient operating revenue, and that's going to emerge and be intensified by the impact of the ESSER expiration due to the historical underfunding of the operating budget at the state and local level over the course of more than a decade. And I know Mr. Traber referred to 20 years. I wrote more than a decade. The insufficiency of revenue growth in each year results in a higher compounded monetary need in each successive year. And so without an acceleration in revenue growth, 24-25 is the year in which the operating cliff is going to emerge and create the conditions for a shortfall in revenue for operational services. Right. Now, what about the ISF? So they may say to us, well, what about the funds that you saved over the last few years? So we acknowledge that, yes, we did save those funds, And we're going to be using those funds to close the gaps. And those funds are going to be depleted, by fiscal year 25, according to current information. So in the current year, if we have to withdraw 9 million, we have 19 million remaining. And then in the next year, we're going to add $1 million from food and nutrition budget for the food and nutrition retirees. If we have to withdraw 15 million, then we'd have a balance of 5 million. So in the year of the cliff, 24-25, we would be adding we'd be adding in August after the close of the prior year, which is why it appears in the new year 24-25, we'd be adding $1 million for the retirees, and then we would have a balance of 6 million. All right. Now, if we don't have to withdraw 9 million this year, if it's only 7, then we have another 2 million available, obviously. Next year, if we don't have to withdraw 15 million, if our revenue increases, we would have additional funds available. But this analysis is based on current information. And so back to the fiscal cliff year, we would have a balance of 6 million. And 6 million would be insufficient, obviously, to close the 24-25 gap, which is going to consist of the escalated costs again, the mandated operating needs, and any prior gap that was offset by an ISF withdrawal. So that's a simplistic analysis of the 3 major components. And then looking ahead to 25-26, under current information, we can predict that the resources from the ISF savings would be depleted. So this is not a good forecast. And we now move on to remind everyone what happened prior to 2021. Prior to 2021, here are all of the reductions that took place. Grand total 243 positions. So no one wants to experience these types of reductions again. And finally, in conclusion, we are facing a fiscal cliff. In 24-25, we're facing a service cliff. And keep in mind, we have to close the operating gap before we can even think about the possibility of redirecting funds or utilizing available resources to maintain any services that are currently in ESSER to any degree at all. We have to first close the operating gap. And so there's also going to be a service cliff, and it's important for everyone to understand that while the pandemic may have subsided, the educational needs that arose are going to continue after the expiration. So we have been searching for new grants that are applicable to specific services that should be extended to benefit our students, but these grants may or may not materialize. So we must first address closing the gap in the operating budget before thinking about maintaining 1 or 2 social workers or 1 or 2 guidance counselors on a limited scale previously funded in ESSER. So on my mind, as a first priority, the highest priority is closing the operating gap. Now, in 23-24, the mayor proposed an addition of 2 million. We acknowledge that appears to now be established as a base addition, since that is the same amount provided in the prior 2 years. That's positive, but it's totally insufficient. It's only a 0.76% increase in the total operating budget, and that is inadequate. So I put in a respectful statement. You can share your views on the respectful statement. I stated the Board of Ed respectfully requests the City Council to consider increasing the base amount.
Thank you, Ms. Siegel. Ms. Baptiste-Perez?
Unfortunately, it just feels like it's the same story, different year. Um, I, a few thoughts that did pop into my mind. I think it's an excellent thing that we finally have qualified teachers with years of experience in this district and not substitute teachers to be relying on full-time subs for our students is a disservice. So that part of the budget, that goes in one ear, out of one ear for me, because our students should have trained, qualified teachers that want to be in the profession in front of them in the classroom. And yes, every teacher needs to have a start, but for the years of full-time subs, I think it's about time we had actual teachers in front of our students. In terms of the budget, I really lack any optimism or faith from our council or the mayor unless the public joins in. Do we share this budget with our, maybe not the full 33 pages, but just like a short 1-page summary of, hey, we're underfunded. If you wonder why we don't receive these services in this school, or if your child is receiving this next year, it'll be gone because the funding source is gone, because we have to keep it simple. But if like I'm an everyday working parent, I'm not going to read through 33 slides of this presentation. I need the overview summary of that. We're eventually going to have to do major cuts. And really the choice is continuing to have substitute teachers, and because I'm sure I've met parents and I've also met with student groups where they're not even aware that they have a full-time sub in front of them. They just know that it's sub quality. And until we get our constituents really notified of the issue, this is almost just a definition of madness. You keep doing the same thing over and over, expecting a different result. Maybe we should have a summary blast sent out to the district so parents are aware of the ramifications. Next year, this grant's gone. If you enjoyed these services, if your kid is in elementary school and had a care teacher, they will be replaced. Also, there was actually a great presentation done by Superintendent Testani, although he was preaching to the choir, where we had the department heads for each department come up and present to the Board of Education, but it should have been presented to City Council, but it was never done before he left the district, where it shows that our staff is squeezed tight, and that also leads to a retention issue. I don't know if it's possible, it's probably a little bit too late, but that was really helpful to hear, like, linguistics, they're overstaffed and they're overworked and underpaid. Social workers, overworked and underpaid. So it doesn't matter what the ESSER funds. From that presentation, I think it was early this school year, there was still a disservice to the district. Whether we pull that video and share it, I think that should be shared with City Council, because just that clip alone shows, I just don't want to hear another blurb of, oh, we're doing the best with what we got. No, we are not doing justice to our students. We're not properly notifying, I think, the parents, because as a parent, there's a trust in the school system that things are being done right. And if the parents were notified that for the whole year, your kid had a substitute teacher, as a parent, I'm sure that would at least invoke some type of an emotion to do something about it, or at least speak up or be encouraged to vote. But it needs to be simple, transparent, and straightforward. It's just a suggestion, but I think that presentation with all the department heads from Mr. Testani that he did do with the board, that was great. I mean, it was just the wrong audience because we don't have the money. We're trying to get the money. So that's all I have to say.
Mr. Macaron.
Well, I think what Ms. Baptiste Perez just said is really important, and I just don't see how any change is going to occur unless we have a change in the guard. You know what I mean? It's just it's just not going to happen. But I understand the need, and I wish it would change, and more attention was put to the board of the Bridgeport Public Schools. That's what I have to say.
Mr. Benahan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I agree with what Ms. Baptiste said. Ms. Christine, you said everything complete. I don't need to say nothing. I agree with you 100%. We need to be sure our parents, they understand what we're going through, because we try the best. We fight for the students, but we need more support of the parents. The parents, they understand what we're doing for Bridgeport School. But I'm absolutely 100% what Ms. Christina said. No more comment, no question, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Mr. Sturgeon.
Yeah, I'm sad to say that Ms. Siegel, that my comment about 20 years were the years that Mayor Ganem has been in charge. But this has been going on. My daughter began kindergarten 30 years ago. 30 years ago, I've been watching this game play out. Underfunding the public schools, letting them decline, cutting, trimming. It reached as you know, Ms. Siegel, because that's when you came to town, it reached a threshold period where the board threw up its hands and declared it was incapable of coming up with a budget that would actually provide an adequate education. Adequate. Forget the glorious education our children deserve, an adequate education with the money that we were being given by the city and state. And when they declared that, that's when the state tried to take over the schools illegally. But I am concerned. I do know that the money is out there, that we are in a situation with the state surplus, and we haven't been flush with this kind of money in the state for years. Just to make my point, 5003, which I disagreed with the way it was structured, because it gave 3 times more money to charter schools than public schools, was giving $22.9 million to Bridgeport schools. And if we got that kind of money, plus forget 2 or 3, maybe 3 to 5 million from the mayor, we would begin to crawl out of the hole that we've been pushed back into. So I don't know what the presentation Mr. Testani showed that Ms. Baptiste Perez is referring to, but I do, listening to you, Marlene, I've listened to a lot of these presentations over the years. I'm sorry, Ms. Siegel. I've listened to a lot of these presentations over the years, and I don't mean this directed at you, obviously. You're just passing on the reality of the numbers. But I think it would be worth it to begin to develop a list. Because as I was listening to you, I was thinking, okay, if we didn't have to use the ESSER money, and if we had adequate funding from the state and the city, what would we be doing? We would be reinstating some of the cuts we made, as we did with the ESSER money. But without the ESSER money, we go back to eliminating any semblance of a para in a kindergarten classroom. And that's where we got to before. So we would hopefully, if we had adequate funding, have a para in every kindergarten classroom, maybe even a para in every first grade classroom. It would you could begin, what would we do if we had, and I think that's really what the parents and the politicians need to see, is what could we be doing if they were doing their job? And so I would ask, I know again, like Ms. Baptiste Perez said with regard to the departmental presentations, that to begin to dream a little and present them, because, you know, it's gloom and doom, and it's an ugly, depressing picture. And it hasn't moved them. There's no guilt in there. It hasn't moved them for years. So is there a way we can move them, the parents, the elected officials, to see what we could be doing in our schools? And I would like to know, though, because I wasn't sure I understood you correctly, Ms. Siegel, how many classes are still being taught by subs this year?
Right now, there's still about 70 to 80 vacancies.
So those are being staffed with subs.
Yes.
Yeah. So if we need to, that's another example. We could have experienced teachers and be hiring those experienced teachers. So you know, because as you know, the trend has always
Right.
been
But
a
the-
teacher
the-
spends five years or so here in Bridgeport and then
Right.
goes somewhere else where they can make money.
The main focus now is to maintain the services we have.
Oh, I agree with you. That's our primary
Right. I
concern.
mean, we
But I
will-
want
we
to
will get
offer
through
some
I'm sorry.
dreams, some possibility of what we could be doing for our students that should be done for them. And those people who are in power should make that decision for them. So I would just, you know, and the board may have more ideas, and I just thought of this listening to you. What we could do if we didn't have to use up all our ESSER money in the next 2 years to balance the budget. What would we do with that ESSER money? What other long-term investments, like the list you showed us of materials and products and services that we're buying, could we buy to enhance the education of our children? So that's it.
Yeah, I somewhat agree. I'll piggyback on that. I somewhat agree with what Mr. Traver said, but it would have to be couched in. We would love to add services. If you gave us $28 million, we could add $1.5 million in social workers, or we could add $1.5 million. But what the city council fails to understand each and every budget cycle is, if they give us every cent we ask for, we're just filling in the hole.
That's right.
We're just getting to maintain the current services. They understand it on their side of the budget, why, when they pay the police department more money, when they pay all these other departments, why their budgets have to rise. But when it comes to our budget, they don't understand. Now, on to my questions. Ms. Siegel, we discussed the collective bargaining agreements and the BEA teachers. It says step salaries. Okay, that $4.3 million is projected on. I don't know if never mind. Maybe I shouldn't ask this in an open forum. But I assume this number will probably rise at some point. But
It's not projected on any assumption of an increase,
yeah, I'm looking at
because the
this.
new contract doesn't take
Right,
effect
because we got a
till
new contract.
cliff year.
Is it this year, or is it?
It's-
This is
based
the
on this
existing,
year?
this is the existing contract. 3/24 will be the last year of the current 4-year agreement. We will be in negotiations in the early fall.
And what is the percentage in the current contracts for the raise?
It's step movement.
It's only a step movement and it's frozen at 0?
Yes, it's step movement and 1.5% at max.
1.5
At max,
at max. Okay, so, ooh.
where the people don't make step.
And that's our future projection? Is based on those numbers?
The 4.3 million is the projection for next year,
But next year? So
23, 24.
All right, but going on in the new contract, 24, 25, those numbers are gonna probably change with some significance.
Well, it's going to depend upon the negotiations, which we
Correct.
should not discuss in public at this
Yeah,
time.
that's what I was saying.
That's correct.
What else was I gonna say? Oh, yeah, what Ms. Baptiste Perez was saying about the presentation, I do agree it's somewhat late in the game, but we could put a bit of it behind in front of the city council. Perhaps just the number and percent shortage that we are in the areas. For instance, I know there's a psychosocial per student ratio that we're supposed to maintain, and we're far away from that. Perhaps you can tell them we can't afford to even approach that. and what have you. Like, we need one for every 500 students. We only got, just numbers I'm throwing out there, not even close to accurate. We only got one for every 750 or something like that. And just something like that could be added. And unfortunately, our parents in our city don't get activated until it personally affects them. And unfortunately, when they come out to advocate, it's in front of us. They need to realize by the time they get in front of us, it's already too late. We can't spend money that we don't have. That's one final point I had.
Yeah.
I
Well,
don't-
this presentation is intended to emphasize the key factors affecting the school district, because in my experience, I have found that the council members don't seem to quite grasp the reasons for the additional funding that we request each year, despite our presentations. And last year, there was not a PowerPoint presentation. I don't believe there was one the year before. So this gives us the capability to highlight with a visual presentation those key elements and to make an impact. So obviously, we don't expect to receive 12 million, but we want them to have an impression in their minds after meeting with the board that the request is totally justified, it's understandable, it's driven by a multitude of factors, and the city definitely should be making every effort to increase the city's share.
Yes, okay.
So
and,
I don't think they fully understand the growth in the special ed population, the growth in the L population. I don't think they understand what we've done with the ESSER funds in order to have a sustainable impact in those areas where we could have a sustainable impact. I don't think they understand the teacher shortage. So these are among the factors that I wanted to emphasize vividly in this presentation.
Totally agree. One final point I got. I should know this, but all the budget years are starting to blur together in my mind. Do we have talking points this year?
I did provide talking points, yes.
Yeah, and if we could do that, I'll speak with Superintendent Perrin and see if we could get that out over the emails to the parents and the whole district wide. Maybe place just the talking points just on the Facebook page and
Yes.
on our social media, just so people could see the talking points. If you could hit the salient points and maybe let them know where some of the possible cuts will be, what happened, and maybe even attach the historic budget cuts that we've had faced the last round of cuts.
Or even keep it simpler, just say all paras gone, Student Volunteer Association.
Correct.
Essentially the foundation to a solid education has been cut within the last few years. And just to kind of, again, because I'm thinking from an everyday parent perspective, you just want to hit the points that's going to push a button.
Right.
And not overly complicated, because
Right.
Well, actually, I was wondering, Ms. Siegel, if the going to that point, it won't be all paras, it'll be the classroom paras, because the special ed paras are going to be mandated by law. Some of them, they'll cut some there, but it won't be all of them. So can we look at what services we've restored for the last few years because of the ESSER?
Well, the services
That's
are on
what
the
you're
slide.
referring to.
Right.
The services
yes,
are on the
and-
slide. All of the
But
information is
But I
here.
didn't see it as specifically as Ms. Baptiste Perez was just talking about, because that's really what they want to know. I
Right
didn't
here,
see
kindergarten paras.
Right. Yeah, I understand what they're getting at. They're like maybe looking for.
So just make that list a little clearer to the parents, that these are the things that we have been able to restore with the extra money that we got because of the COVID pandemic. But this is all going away over the next 2 years. And if we have to spend all of this money on that, we can't spend it on other enhancement of education, and it will still go away. We're just deferring when this is going to happen.
Right, perhaps use the numbers, everything funded by ESSER funds with the number of positions next to it. These are potential cuts coming when we run out of ESSER funds, X amount of paras, X amount of psychologists, X amount of social workers. That's trying to get the gist of what everyone's asking.
Yep.
And I want to recognize Mr. Benahan, his hands have been up very patiently.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Don't worry, we're still here until 10 o'clock. Anyway, I have a question for Ms. Siegel. Ms. Siegel, good evening. Thank you for your report, like always. It's something you can help me and prepare to all these PAC leaders for each school so we can do a presentation. Each one of them can do a presentation with the parents, or, PAC and PTSO leader, like Ms. Rocha, Ms. Link, that can help me with that. So they can understand our budget, how important it is that we need some more money for our students, in the future, present and future, for the kids. You think you can help me with something small so we can present all the PAC leaders?
Well, I have limited time now going forward. You can use this presentation. I don't have time to create a new presentation.
Okay, no, I'm okay to use that. So I just want to ask you the permission. So I'm gonna talk with Ms. Rocha and Ms. Lin so we can do something. Each leader, each school, they can see, what we're going through, so parents, they can know what we're doing. Thank you, Ms. Siegel. No more question, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Thank you.
And then the other mistakes.
Ms. Siegel, I just think that if you had the talking points that Mr. Sokolovic asked for a moment ago, and combined with the kind of things that we've been able to add back on with the ESSER money that we won't be able to keep funding if we don't get an increase from our normal sources of funds, those two things would help Mr. Benahan with talking to the parents about how that's going to impact their real life, their day-to-day life in the schools. And it's the sort of thing, when you combine it with maybe a list of the elected city council people, it would be useful to be handed out or emailed out to our parents.
That would be developed by the board, the list of the
Yeah.
council people. Yeah, that
Yes.
is not in my realm.
No, but that if you develop the material,
I have talking points, so I can
Yes.
share the talking points. You can
So no
you can
extra
add
work.
anything that you like to them. That's your prerogative.
well, just the list of specific ESSER funded positions. How many paras have we funded with ESSER? How many mental health and social service workers have we funded
The
with?
guidance counselors are listed here, plus 10. The social workers are listed as well.
Okay,
Yeah, 10.
all right, that's good. I'll go back through it.
All right, Ms. Baptiste Perez.
This is just a comment, I guess, for us as a board. Maybe we can make a more visually pleasing,
Appealing,
pleasing.
please.
So it stands out more. I'm gonna leave it there.
Yep.
Yes, and is there anything else? Anybody have anything else? That was the last?
Nope.
That was the last thing, correct? Yeah.
Yep.
Okay, everybody else, entertain a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
All in favor? Yeah.
Second,
Uh,
aye.
second. There you go. Thanks, Mike.
Oh, I can't.
All
Sorry,
in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
forgot which meeting I was.
Motion carries. Have a
Thank
great
you,
night.
Miss.
Thank you, Ms. Siegel.
Thank you, Ms.
everybody.
Miss Siegel.
Thank you. Good evening.
Have a good night, everyone. God bless you all.
Good night, everybody.